I'm super happy to be here with you guys today, and super happy to be part of this community building for the growth marketing, growth hacking, growth in general. I know I've been speaking a couple of years back before COVID in Kaunas for similar conference, and I know the topic is always hot, like people have lots of questions. So hopefully you're going to have a good conversation and spend the next hour and more hours to go, obviously, with the next speakers, thinking about growth, thinking about how we can build your companies, how we can make your life easier, basically. Because I think like with the growth as a mindset and the strategy, which is the topic of my presentation, is something that can really make your life easier if you work in IT. I have a question before. So who is a founder? Who's a startup founder? Raise your hands. Okay, cool. Who works in marketing? Cool. Who works in product? Amazing. Cool. Perfect. So I think we have very nice mix today of all of you guys, and you're gonna enjoy it. Sorry, guys, just trying to. Okay, cool. So why I even dare, to stand in front of you today? I think you got a presentation of my person, but I haven't understand a lot. But I've been working 14 years in the digital space, going through product management, marketing, sales, and also entrepreneurship. I started in 2009 building products for 30 million users as a product manager in a company called Nasza Klasa, NK, which is like the social network. You guys, maybe some of you remember the times there was like pre-Facebook, there were local social networks. I think in Lithuania it was One, right? Do you guys remember One? Yeah. So it was the same group. I think it was called Forticom Group. And I built lots of products in there. It was amazing times. I learned a lot, how to build products, how to work with customers. And then I decided, because I was studying in the Netherlands, and it was between my bachelor's and masters, I decided to go back to the Netherlands. And after my studies, after a year of studies, came back to Nasza Klasa. But apparently after this year, there was nothing to come back to, because that was the year the Facebook took off, and I'm gonna tell you guys why, what's the reason and why they did so. And then I started to work for Google. So I worked in Google Warsaw office in the sales team. So sales at Google is more like consultancy, right? So you work with the big brands, with big media agencies and marketing agencies, of basically helping them how to spend, how to leverage the budgets they have on Google in the best way. Amazing time, amazing company, and that was the time I really learned how to work with the data, Google Analytics, how the Google products work. But I was always into this kind of entrepreneurial vibe. I loved working with startups, so I stepped away from Google and started working with multiple startups, which led, after a couple of years, to start a growth marketing agency. I think first one in Poland, and Tomek, my co-founder, will be speaking later to you guys as well. And this growth marketing agency was then acquired. We merged with Ladder.io, which is probably one of the biggest and perhaps even the most famous growth marketing agencies in the world. You perhaps, if you like reading about growth, perhaps you heard about the playbook. We have lots of tactics in the tactical database. Amazing time. I spent I think almost 3 years there working with great brands like Monzo Bank, Booking.com for business, and many more bigger and smaller startups. And then I stepped out of the agency. I work for Airalo, which is pretty interesting eSIM startup based in Singapore. It's fully remote. They just raised I think $60 million. And now I'm Chief Growth Officer for Edvoy, which is super interesting company. It's an edtech company, and what we do, we help prospective students coming from various parts of the world, mainly Southeast Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, but also MENA region, China, to help them go to studies abroad, many to the UK, US, Canada. I'm lucky enough to manage the team of almost 40 marketers and working very closely with the product on true growth. And as always with these conferences, I always start thinking like, what is the objectives? Like, what I want you guys to, go away with from my presentation. And I think in this case, I really want to plant a seed of this growth mindset with you, right? So if at least 10% of you, stepping out, going to your homes after the presentation and say, well, that's actually something that's really interesting, and I want to start, using this in my day-to-day life, in my company, my startup, I'll be really, really happy, right? So I think, I think that's what I want to achieve today. And going to the topic, like, what is growth, right? I think it's really important to answer this question, what we actually understand as growth. Because for many, and perhaps you heard it with your founders or with your managers, like this is like the holy growth of the business, right? And I think we all understand why, right? So the startup founders are betting on company growth, like they want a growth, right? The shareholders want to see company growth as well, to increase the value, right? They all want to see this hockey stick growth, right? Which is like, growing like this, because we all have in our minds, every founder has in their minds this kind of a view of, Silicon Valley company, Facebook, Uber, Slack, that actually skyrocketed, and everybody wants to achieve it. And one thing they want to see hacks, right? They want to see this kind of a tricks, right, to grow faster and smarter. But the question is is it even possible, right? And growth hacking is kind of a way to answer this question. And what does it actually mean, right? So we have two words, growth and hacking. And growth, guys, it's obviously like taking the full responsibility of what it takes to grow the business, multidisciplinary think, boundaries and silos, with this kind of a hacking way. So trying to be smarter, trying to be faster, trying to be better than the rest. Obviously, it's coming from the regular hacking concept. Sorry, guys, I'm just clicking it and. Yeah, and when you see on the growth hacking as a term, right? It's been coined. The term has been coined in 2012 by Sean Ellis, who is kind of probably one of the most well-known growth hackers in there. It's going up. There's some kind of a fluctuations in the recent years, but it's still like the term is really being searched, and lots of people looking for these growth hackers, growth hacks, which makes lots of sense. And when you ask the question, who is a growth hacker, right? So we're going to talk about the growth mindset in a moment. I'm going to tell you like what are the characteristics of the good growth person. But from the very high level, conceptual level, some people like Andrew Chen, who is who used to work at Uber, now he's in an investment company. He says that the growth hacker is a new VP of marketing. A growth hacker is a person whose true north is growth, right? This is Sean Ellis, the guy that used to work from Dropbox as well. Like I mentioned it to you about the one who coined the term. And Hiten Shah, for example, who built this tool, Kissmetrics, for user analytics, he says that when startups hire seasoned marketers, they got the opposite of growth. And I'm also going to tell you why it's the case in a few bits. Sorry, guys, again. Okay, cool. And as I mentioned, like this kind of a growth hacks are something that everybody wants to hear, right? Everybody wants to hire a growth person, and this Dilbert, Stripe is really the case. He says we need a growth. Like the boss says, we need a growth hacker for our web apps. I think I'll be the perfect for that job. That's what the Dilbert says. The boss says, I've heard of growth hackers, but I have no idea what they do all day. And you could do nothing, and I wouldn't know the difference and then I could work from home, right? So that's kind of what lots of people think, like, well, okay, I want to grow Hacker, but I really don't know what these guys are going to do. And hiring such person is not easy, and I can tell you, I've been there many times. Tomek been there many times. And the reason is it's kind of a simple. And because people that hire growth marketers, they think they're going to come up with lots of, tactics, growth hacks that will skyrocket our business, which is not the case, right? Because, and this is probably one of the most important quotes for today, there are no silver bullets, right? And I've heard many times, Adam, where are these growth hacks? Like, give me these 3 growth hacks that we're going to grow, which is impossible to do because every company is different, every customer group is different, and it's all about the processes, it's all about the systems, it's all about the mindset. Obviously, there are some tactics that are you have some probability they're gonna work, but again, every company is different. And growth, when you think about it, is a very multidisciplinary thing, right? So the synergy in cooperation is extremely needed. No silos, right? I was working in many companies before that. They're like silos, product, or engineering, marketing, sales. There was no cooperation at all. And growth and growth hacking is actually something in between, right? So you need to make sure that like all the parties work together. And the key to growth, there are a couple of keys to growth. One is being very customer-centric, right? So that's what I'm always telling my team. Like, think from your customer perspective, from your user perspective. Like, what they want to see, what they want to achieve. Like, what are the personas? What's important for them? Try to get into the customer shoes. And that's what the biggest accelerators or the best accelerators in this world are telling on these companies. Do you guys know Y Combinator? It's like an American accelerator. And I was lucky enough to speak to one of the founders of the company that went through this whole acceleration process. It was a Japanese company doing kind of a gene research. And I asked him, like, okay, well, how is this Y Combinator, this amazing accelerator looks like? What they teach you? And he was like, they teach us 2 things. One is that there's never a product market fit, and I'm going to explain in a few bits what a product market fit is. And the second thing is, like, you always need to speak to your customers. So what the person does, every Friday, the CEO of the company, right? Every Friday he does nothing else than just talking to the customer, just trying to understand how you like the product, what we can change, what you like, what you don't like. And this is the true customer-centric approach. Then data-driven, right? There's no growth marketing, growth hacking, however you call it, without the data. It's extremely important. And there are many companies, and we had a discussion with Philip yesterday, there are many companies that they want to start growth marketing or hacking, but they have no clue, how the users work, like what is the data. I've seen multiple cases that the people say, yes, we actually have the data, which means we install the Google Analytics, but we have no clue, how we don't read it, right? We don't learn from the data. So, for example, when I used to work in an agency with the companies, the first thing we did was always audit of your analytical stack of your tools, how it's been set up. Do you actually know? Do you learn from the data? Because without the data, you basically are blind. You have no clue what's happening. And then the third key to growth is the experimentation. There's going to be a lot about experimentation today, not only on my session, but Tomek, Phillips, and other speakers about A/B testing, which is really important. So you have to have this kind of a scrappy, experimenting mindset to grow. Everything needs to be systemized, so systems and processes are important. So you have to learn from your mistakes as well and your successes. And the proper team should also be built. And when you think about the definition, right? So I always like to put it into the definition. What is a growth marketing, right? Or growth hacking? It's a ROI, so return on investment, and data-driven, full funnel approach right? Based on experimentation, which is basically, thinking about the scientific method meets marketing. And I know there are people like watching us online, also students, so they should be kind of be familiar with this. I graduated my studies many years back, but it's all about this kind of a scientific approach to marketing. And the full funnel approach, and again, I think it's going to be a separate session today on the pilot metrics on this funnel, but it's extremely important to understand that the customer journey is actually the funnel, right? So it starts with the acquisition, so how the user finds us. It goes through the activation. What's the first experience like how the users find us? Then do users come back, which is a retention? Do we actually make money out of these users, right? So the revenue. And the referral, right? Do users tell others? That's, when you have this kind of an amazing experience as a user, you're basically going to tell your friends. And, that's probably all of you have been in a situation that you found this amazing app or amazing product, so you're like talking to your user, well, I have this amazing app, right? Like, it's awesome, you should install it. So that's the case. And I told you that the working in silos is something that needs to be broken with the growth marketing, and that's the exact reason, right? So the traditional marketing, and again, I used to work like this some years, a couple of years back, was focusing only on acquisition, right? So you as a marketer, you just need to acquire traffic, you need to acquire users. But very often, and I was the case as well, I was responsible for the revenue, so I was responsible for the bottom of the funnel. I was like orders, purchases, revenue, and you couldn't actually influence any of these, right? So that actually was my background of why I started to think about this kind of a full funnel approach. And the growth marketing or growth in general needs to look into the whole funnel, very holistic way. And think about the user journey, right? From the very first touch point to very, very, very last touch point, and try to improve it. And I was speaking about the scientific method, right? So you guys remember, scientific method meets marketing. And this is the scientific method in general, right? So again, for all of you guys who just remember, how you work with your thesis, you always started with asking a question, doing some background research, what's been done, constructing a hypothesis, right? So what you wanna research. Then test it. Very often there's experimentation, like doing a little bit of this and that. Checking if the procedure is working. If it's not working, then you come back to the experiment. If it's working, then you analyze the data. You come up with the conclusions, and think if the results you have are aligned with the hypothesis or another research, or it's not, and then you communicate the results. And that's more or less very high level. The same, the way we all the scientists, let's call it like this, work on the research. We think about the growth in general, and this is system I really like. It's coming from Brian Balfour, who is probably one of the most well-known growth marketer or the growth person. It's how we think as growth marketers, how we think about the scientific method. It's called high tempo testing, right? It's coming from the agile process. You brainstorm or you analyze, right, what you want to improve, what needs to be changed. Then you having the list of these ideas, then you try to prioritize, right? So what's potentially having the highest probability of success, and you're going to discuss a little bit about it in a moment. Then you experiment, right? So checking if it's working. If it's working, you implement it, and then you analyze it, and you systemize in the playbooks. And that's the kind of a repeated process. And when you think about what it's coming from, it's basically built on very similar, process. You guys probably build products, the agile process, right? Define, build, release, define, build, release. I remember times we used to work in the waterfall. That was just awful. We're lucky to have this agile and agile process. And again, if you think about it, it's coming from the lean startup, right? So probably read the book about these lean startups or read about it. Again, it's how we can validate the ideas very quickly, right? How we can make sure that we have and won a couple of sprints. We can build it, we can measure it, we can learn from what we do. So all these kind of bits are coming together. And experimentation in general is a key to growth. Like this guy, it's David Ogilvy, who is probably one of the most well-known marketers of the 20th century. Marketing tycoon. He created a company called Ogilvy and Mathers. I think you guys even have an office here in Vilnius. And he was famous. He's famous for really looking into the customer behavior and researching customers before doing the marketing. And probably he was one of the first marketers in 20th century that actually started doing it. That's why he was super successful. And even him in like his high time was in 50s or 60s. He says like never stop testing, and your advertising will never stop improving. Right, so even him believed in experimentation, and just to show you the couple of slides about the power of experimentation in general, right? We talk a lot about the mindset. This is the Twitter growth, now X, right? The growth, and between 2010 and 2012. I know it's been 10 years ago, or even 13 years ago. But what it shows, the red line, right? A couple of first quarters, they did in general like half the experiment per week, and only then when they actually implemented this experimentation process. So they did 10 experiments per week. You really see how the curve went up. They even have a really nice blog about this, about the whole experimentation and A/B testing process. So you definitely can look it up. And that's the slide I really like, and probably is going to be repeated a couple of times today. There's this guy from Harvard called Stefan Tomke. He wrote a book called Experimentation Works in 2020. And what he did, he compared the S&P, so Standard & Poor 500, which is like the index, right, the stock exchange index of the 500 biggest companies, with the companies that actually experiment, right? Like he created his own kind of an index of big companies, stock exchange companies that actually experiment, and this is like how big the performance, like the ROI or whatever, like he used is. So you guys see that the companies that experiment are really like way beyond the regular S&P index, and we have in mind all this kind of a ideas of the growth hacks, of these amazing, super successful companies in the Silicon Valley that did this growth hacks, right? And that's exactly what I'm hearing. Like Dropbox did this amazing growth hack, or Facebook, and they grew. That's fine, right? But not many people know that behind these actually growth hacks or tactics that work, there were like hundreds of experiments that failed, right? And Sean Ellis is talking about it in the Dropbox. And just to give it a bit of insights of what they did, right? So I don't know how many of you know like how Airbnb grew. So Airbnb obviously is a place to find rooms or houses to short or long-term stay, and they actually experiment a lot when they wanna grow. In the beginnings, right? But the thing that really, work out after lots of experimentation is that they utilize the existing platform, right? Which is one of the tactics. Craigslist for finding rooms to rent. So Craigslist is kind of a listing platform in the US, and people are listing their homes or rooms to share. And they actually created a bot that was emailing those owners of the rooms to become part of Airbnb. Dropbox, I mentioned, like I don't know how many of you guys use their referral program. I remember, like, again, many years back, before even Google Drive existed, I think they were like the first company that did this documentation in documents in the cloud, and I was really using this referral program, right? Because for every person you invited, you got like 500 megabytes of free storage. And they saw like 4,000 like amazing growth in a year on 15 months. And that's been really great. One of the biggest successes. By the way, I was lucky enough to visit the Dropbox office in San Francisco a few years back. That's amazing thing. So you should read about this case, like how many failures they have before this, because it's really amazing story. Facebook, I mentioned that around 2010, right, the local social networks like Nasha Cluster or One started to drop, and that's the reason why, right? So Facebook was one of the first companies that had like the separate growth team. They tested lots of things. Some things were working, some things didn't work out. Again, but after a couple of hundred experiments, one of the hypotheses they have is like we should go international, right? So we should add more languages to the platform, which is a fair hypothesis. But what they did, and that was really unusual and really innovative, they didn't use the translation platforms or translation companies. They simply crowdsourced it to the users, right? So users, the community, started to translate Facebook, and as you guys can see, like the real growth started outside the US, right? So obviously, United States was the first market, but the real growth is from the outside the US, and this is what they did. The community. And the PayPal also referral. Right, so you guys remember the funnel referral being very last part of the funnel. If you're a happy user, right, you're gonna refer it, and that's exactly what PayPal used, what PayPal utilized for the users. They created a referral program, 10% growth daily at some point. Right, so these type of referral programs has been already like widely applied in multiple companies like Uber and so on. Basically, for every person you invite, you both get some price, right? And in the case of PayPal, it was $10. And the question is when to actually start working on growth, right? And that's there's like in the community, there's like lots of discussions about this topic. This is the full cycle of product development stages, like how we start. We start with a prototype, we have an idea, then we try to build the MVP. Then we have hopefully the product market fit, which very briefly is having a product that customers actually want and will pay for. And here, like after product market fit, is where you actually need to start thinking about experimentation and scaling it up. I know some of you might not have been in this stage yet, and it doesn't mean you don't need to experiment. Just do it a little bit different. But I'll just come back to that. We actually, like myself and Tomek, we wrote an article about this, right? So how to find the product market fit. You can guys find it on growthframeworks.substack.com. Startup Founder is the OG original gangster, and what we say that if you don't have the product market fit, you shouldn't outsource it either to the agency or the freelancer or just growth person. Like this is not the solution to your problems. You have to be the growth person as a founder. Right, and try to understand your customers, be very customer driven to find it, because no one else is gonna solve your problems. And before product market fit, so again, if you're just starting out, you're thinking about the ideas, there are some frameworks that I really love to help you kind of get into this growth hacking mindset. And I think this is one of the best books to read. Really easy one, really nice one. You can probably read it in a day. It's called Traction: How Any Startup Can Achieve Explosive Customer Growth. It's been written by Gabriel Weinberg and Justin Mars, the guys from DuckDuckGo, which is like the US-based search engine. And they basically say that there are around 18 channels, growth channels. They mention like SEO, email marketing, speaking at conferences, and so on. That if you want to get attraction, so start up with your idea, get your first customers, you should think about. And they have this amazing bullseye framework, which again is super simple. They say, write down a bunch of channels you think you are good at, right? Or it might be good for your company for getting first customers. Then choose top 3, so the ones you really believe you have some experience with, or the competitors are doing, and just test it out, right? So for a quarter, if you say it's a blog post, write a couple of articles. If you say and share it, on social media. If say it's a paid ads, spend $500 on paid ads and see what's coming out from there. And after a month, right, just invest all your potential and all your time in one channel that actually works for you. So be very focused into what's working for you. And obviously, if we are talking about the books, this one is a Bible for the growth hacking community. Sean Ellis and Morgan Brown. It's really amazing book, really good read as well. After you have this product market fit, so you want to scale up. Okay, and how to start working on growth. So you need 2 things. You need obviously the growth strategy, so knowing what you do, but also you need this kind of a culture, the growth mindset, which I think it's extremely important. And what is the growth mindset? So Carol Dweck, and she's a US-based psychologist. She wrote this book called Mindset: The New Psychology of Success. And she says there are 2 types of mindset. One is the fixed mindset. And when you have the fixed mindset, you say, I know the best. This is good enough. Yeah, I give up. I don't want to do it. I never be that smart. I want to avoid making mistakes. Right? So it resonates with you. I mean, we all know some people that are like this. And if your approach to life is like this, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to become a successful, marketer, growth marketer, because you need to have some like the proper approach, which is, I want to improve. I want to learn from my own mistakes, right? And probably like 70 or 80% of experiments you guys going to do will going to fail, right? So it doesn't mean like I give up. It means like, okay, what I can learn from that, like what I learned from these mistakes. Always ask for the feedback. I know it's difficult for many of us. It was difficult for me as well, to receive feedback, because I thought like I know everything, which is obviously not right. So ask for feedback and don't give up, right? So that's extremely important. It's hard to implement, the growth methodologies without this. And again, we can say it's a mindset, so it's an individual thing, but from my perspective, my experience is more of a company culture, right? So the whole company, like the bigger the company, obviously the most challenging it's going to be to implement it, but the whole company needs to say, like, we want to grow. We want to have this growth mindset. It is a challenge, right? It takes time. It takes resources. And when you think about the characteristics of a person, of the growth hacker, and that's based on the book, but also on our experiences with the people we were hiring for these roles. So obviously, like being kind of a technical and data-driven helps, right? So if you like looking on numbers, if you like this kind of a hacky solutions to the thing, it definitely helps. Customer empathy, right? So try to get into your customer's shoes as well. Be a team player. Be curious. I think that's really important, right? Like there's so many people that don't Google stuff. I mean, I've been in this situation so many times. Like people say, I don't know how to do it, and I was like, just Google it. Like how to write an email or how to build it. People just don't have this kind of a mindset. That's exactly what a growth marketer does. And I don't know everything. Like, but I know how to search, right? So that's like something to have, and then focus, right? So focus on one thing. Just start and finish it, and then see what is the outcome. And obviously, like everybody wants to have this entrepreneurial mindset, which again is difficult, right? To have, but you need to have this character. You need to feel responsible for what you deliver, and the people. Cool. So, are you still with me? Yeah. Cool. So I mentioned that the team is important, and that's another discussion, and probably like another hour we can talk. But you can like. If you want to bring into some kind of a framework into this, like you can start thinking about 3 roles, right? So we need the hipster, which is like the designer, right? Somebody who will design stuff. We need the hacker, is the developer, like technically oriented person, and the hustler, so the marketer, salesperson, product manager. Based on my personal experience, I think the best setup for the growth team is to have a head of growth, so or the growth manager, somebody who will lead the team, the data analyst, and again, I'm not talking about this having like individuals. It's about the roles, right? So you can obviously have the growth marketer who's like the data analyst as well. It depends on the volume, right? But you also need a designer, the copywriter, right? You would be surprised how many things you can improve by just changing the sentences, changing the words. Like copywriting is really, really powerful. And then an engineer, right? So some technical capabilities, some technical skill sets, perhaps a growth product manager, right? So somebody who will work with the developer. And that's going to be the optimal team. Obviously, it can be way more, complex, and this is actually Edvoy, right? We have multiple teams in multiple regions, and we have the global team, and so that's pretty complex. And but just to understand, how you can think about it, you can have the independent growth team, right? Which probably is my kind of a preferable solution. Is to have this growth pod as a separate. Right, so working with the product, with engineering, with design, with marketing. You can have the cross-functional team structure, right? So you have the teams like the product team, engineering, marketing, design, and just one person or like some part of this team is working as a separate team. Or you can have the mixed structure, which is a little bit of this. And honestly speaking, like with every company, again, every company is different, so you really need to look into this. Cool, and why you need a strategy, right? So we talked about the mindset, we talked about the general growth marketing, and you need a strategy to know what to do to grow, right? And there's nothing quite so useless as doing things with great efficiency, but something that should not be done at all, right? And that's really powerful sentence, right? Because people in multiple companies like to do stuff, but they don't think why they do what they do, right? And sometimes it's like it's good to totally take a step back, think what you need to do, right? Like what we have to do, and this is what the strategy is for, right? And just not to confuse you, like there are 2 bits, important bits: strategy and tactics, right? So the strategy is basically answering the question what we want to achieve, right? Like how we want to achieve it, why, right? So for example, in order to generate more leads, we have to increase conversion rate on our landing page. And this is like the general strategy. But the question how to do it is a pure tactic, right? So we can improve it by an experiment, changing the copy, changing the design. It also might be a new channel, right? So we can optimize the channel or improvement. And in order to improve conversion rate on our landing page, we can test, new value proposition, new form layout, optimize form layout. And this is the tactic. And even, Sun Tzu, which is, perhaps some of you heard about this book, The Art of War. It's a medieval Chinese book about, the strategy for war. He says that strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory, but tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. And you need a strategy to understand where you are right now, right? So you have to understand where you are, but also understand where you want to be. Like, what are the goals, what you want to achieve? You need to understand your audience, your customers, and also your competitors, like what they do is really successful, what they do that's not. And obviously how much budget, how much resources you have, right? So you cannot achieve stuff without the resources. How your current funnel performs, what team is needed, and finding your growth levers, right? By levers, we mean like the things that really like push you to the next level. It might be a new channel, it might be a new product, or so on. And when you come back to the funnel, right? And it's really important to understand the numbers, right? Because very often from, like let's say it's 100 people coming to your website, or 1,000 people, you're only going to acquire 60, right? So 60 out of this 100 people will actually sign up, and then probably like one person out of this 100 people will actually become the paying customer, right? So that's really important to have this exercise, to write down your numbers, and that's one of the ways you can do it, So just to find out the category, what is the acquisition, activation, retention, referral revenue for you, right? Like what does it mean? Which is here called the user status. So for example, the acquisition is just visit on the site, a person that don't abandon the site for like 2 pages instead of 2 seconds. Then the activation might be a sign up, or subscription for a blog, retention, repeat visits, and so on and so on. And then think about the conversion. So what conversion you have, and this is what I mean by the being data driven, right? So all this data can be found in Google Analytics, or all the analytical tools. And also think of what's the actual value, right? Like what are the metrics? What is the customer acquisition cost? What's the cost of actually, referral? And think from this ROI, right, return on investment perspective. Does it actually make sense? And what are the things I need to improve? You can also think about the segmentation of the users, right? So we can do it on the horizontal level. So let's say we have 10,000 users, and see, how many new users you have, how many returning users, how many customers, right? And just try to understand what might be your challenge, right? So for example, in the thing in the middle, you see you have lots of new users, but the customers, we can get better. So is it like, we're doing amazing well with acquisition, or perhaps there's something wrong with the retention? On the one on the right, majority of customers, but we don't have so many new users, right? So it might be, we might be amazing in terms of conversion, but perhaps we should just speed up the acquisition, and so on and so on. And you can also look on the vertical segmentation, which is channels, right? So understand which channel actually gives you the most customers, the most revenue, right? Because very often the channel that you spend the most on, because you believe so, or all the others are doing it, when you look into the data, it doesn't provide you the best ROI, right? And this is clearly visible here. So for example, the most budget is spent on Facebook, but actually the best cost per acquisition is, in this case, the Apple search ads and Google ads. And in the end, and that's kind of a complex, but in the end, you need to think about your growth formula, right? So this one kind of a equation that will tell you like what is a sustainable growth for you. And this is the case of Amazon, right? So what they did, they say, well, if we want to grow, we need more traffic and conversion rates, which is top of the funnel, times the magic moment. So what actually means that the user actually says, like, comes to the website with the product, says, "Wow, that's really amazing," right? So this first experience, and the experience is extremely important, right, for everybody. I mean, you probably have like 5 or 10 seconds if you are on the App Store just to say, well, actually, I want to install this app or not. The same with the landing page. And the core product value, right? So does it solve a real problem? Again, this is for Amazon. But for us, the easiest way to think about it is like you have a metric, right? For example, activation rate. And if you want to increase this metric, the bunch of steps that needs to happen before, right? So if you want to increase this metric, you have to experiment. You have to improve these things over there. And again, come back to the experimentation process. You guys remember, like repeatable experimentation, prioritization, testing, implementation, systemization. You have to start your strategy with actually setting up the objectives, like what is important for your business, right? What's the most important metric for you, the so-called the North Star, what you want to achieve. I like to do it in this OKRs kind of a framework, so objectives, key results. So for example, the objective might be, we want to increase revenue by 30%, right, in the next quarter or the next year. We want to decrease the cost per install by 50%. We want to get like the cost per acquisition CPA lower than $5 or have a conversion rate higher than 7, right? So this is what we need to start with. What's important for the business? It's good to write it down, right? It's good to write it down. And then you think, like, how we can do it, right? Again, think about the steps. So if we want to increase the revenue, what needs to happen, right? We need to have more users. Perfect. Or we need to increase the average value of the user. Amazing. Or we need to increase the repeated purchase. That's good, right? So you write down all these ideas. You try to figure it out, some experiments by, I even like watch YouTube. I read about it on the blogs, and we have lots of communities. But actually, the company members can be amazing source of ideas, right? And this is the State of Growth 2020, the research, and they said, how to generate ideas, and 53% of the ideas are coming from the company members internally. There are only like 30% coming from the growth team. So always speak to your teams, like the sales team or the customer support team. They are like talking to the users so they know the pain points. Write down all these ideas in the one document. Let's call it, we call it a backlog of ideas. So what I want to implement, like drip campaign for non-activated users, or offer an ebook, or have a re-engagement email campaign. Try to think, what are the predictions, right? You can have this bunch of methodologies to assess the impact. One is the eyes, second is the pie. I'm going to speak about it more later on about when I'm going to go into A/B experimentation process, and try to think what are the ideas with the highest potential to success for you, and start implementing it, right? In ideal world, you have this experiment doc, so every hypothesis, everything you want to implement, you just create a doc that says, this is the hypothesis, this is the experiment design, this is how much time we need for it. And you think about the hypothesis, right? If you have the hypothesis, right, written in the experimentation backlog, right, as a one column, that's still good, right? Because it triggers you to think, right? So if we want to change this, if you want to send this re-engagement campaign, our engagement rate or whatever the metric is will potentially grow by 10%. And it doesn't matter if this is good or right or wrong, right? You can put whatever you put in there. The important thing is that you actually verify your results with the hypothesis and you learn from it, right? So you said, okay, I thought that we were going to grow by 30%, but we grew by 10, right? Which is still amazing because we grew. And then next time you're going to think about the re-engagement campaign, right? You're going to look into what you did and say, okay, well, actually, we're going to grow by 15% right now because we know what we did wrong. You can also say if variable, then the results, because, and the rationale, right? So there are multiple ways you can do it. You can A/B test the ad creatives. You can A/B test different copy, right? So this is the example from Ladder. Actually, the 90% more installs with the same cost per install. The ad with that says, it was actually, by the way, for the money dashboard, that the student loans, and it says make your student loans last the distance. Works so much better than don't be the skint on where exams are over, right? So just with the copy, and I told you like the copy is super powerful, 90% more up installs. And then also you can test the different audience. So have the same ad shown to different audience, different segments, and see which one is working the best. And what's important in the end is to really, like, if you implement something, really take a step back and think, well, what's the results of this experiment? Is it actually positive? So we actually achieve what we hypothesized for, or is it negative? So we didn't grow at all, we actually decreased, or whatever happened, or it's inconclusive. Sometimes it happened, it didn't work out. So it's very difficult to say on the data if it worked out. And it's important to systemize it, right? So again, like we are building the processes, we are thinking about the systems, and it's important because potentially company gonna grow, you're gonna get more people to your team, and they're gonna say, I have this amazing idea, and they were like, and you were like, well, actually we did it like half a year back, right? Like this is the document with it. Just read it, see what we did, see what were the results, and tell us what we can improve. So it's kind of building this organizational knowledge, and if you think about bringing this growth into your day-to-day life, I think it's a good idea to have at least like one meeting, one very short meeting per week. You have lots of growth meeting agendas to be found on online. This is one of what I did. Spend 15 minutes on looking at the metrics and focus areas, 10 minutes on reviewing the experiments from the last week, 15 minutes about the key lessons. Just discuss it, what you guys did, what worked out, what didn't work out. 15 minutes on what you actually want to do in this sprint, right? You remember we work in a sprint, so 1 week or 2 weeks, preferable time. And then check if there's influx of new ideas for the backlog, and that's really powerful, right? So if you do it, and I did it multiple times in my career, it really like makes people think, make people trigger to think, and you can really start to see some patterns. All right. And the tool stack, we have 10 minutes to go. I was just spitting a little bit because I want to hear some questions from you guys, if there are any. So obviously, tool stack, it's, we can use so many tools out there. The tools I prefer myself, I just try to keep it simple. So I use Google Analytics, GA4 right now for analysis. Sometimes I use Amplitude or Mixpanel for product analytics. I used to do a lot of Google Optimize, which is like amazing free tool for A/B experimentation, but it's gonna be gone in like 20 days, literally. So you need to look for alternative. Mailchimp is the probably the tool of choice for email marketing. HubSpot for content marketing on the CRM, and so on and so on. But again, this MarTech landscape is like getting crazier and crazier every year, right? So the MarTech map is being actually updated every year for like 10 years now, and it's becoming just more and more and more of these SaaS tools and companies that want to solve things. Like you don't see it, but every like bit of it is kind of SEO tools, right, or video marketing tools or whatever, right? So it's also becoming pretty challenging. There's a little bit of noise on this market, but for us growth marketers, tools are important, but tools shouldn't be, we shouldn't say, well, we want to do it because there's this new tool we have the company. It's like, this is the strategy, this is what we're going to do, and then think about the tools that will allow us to do it. So just to sum up, guys, before you guys have some questions. So 11 things I want you to remember from this presentation. 1, growth is a multidisciplinary thing, right? So it's not marketing, it's not sales, it's not product, it's combined, right? There are no silver bullets, so every company is different. You really need to get into the nitty-gritty of it. Start working on this proper growth after the PMF before try to get traction. Again, experiment, right? Because this is the really important keyword, but perhaps in a little bit different way. And remember the book I suggested. Growth is a scientific process. Understand, define, test, repeat. Is a full funnel thing. Growth mindset exists, right? So really, like when you're gonna look for a growth person in your company, really remember this, right? So try to get to know the mindset of this person. Try to build this even tiny 2 people, 3 people growth team, if you can, and make them focus only on growing the business, on growing the metrics. Always work with the strategy, so know what to do, understand where you are today and where you want to be in like the next quarter, next year. Write down some backlog of ideas, some things you want to test, right? Just create one document. Prioritize, think about the things about the experiments that potentially can give you the most success, and experiment. And again, tools can help, but it's all about the processes, system, and the people, and then the tools. All right, and it was a pleasure. Thank you, guys. Hope you're still awake, and happy to answer the questions if you have any.
I can have a go first.
Yeah, perfect.
So yeah, starting with the back and the tools. AI, generative AI for marketing. What's your stance on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. I'm thinking about it a lot. I mean, it's definitely extremely helpful, right? So just to give you an example of my current company on Edvoy, we generated probably like 5 times more articles for SEO using AI, not written by the AI, but with the help of AI. Than we do with the freelancers, and they are indexed extremely well. So they're like working extremely well at Google. So it's definitely a help. It's definitely a support. I mean, it's news for me and for all of you guys as well. Tomek is way better than myself and ChatGPT 4, but it's definitely amazing revolution. We can even call it that way. That will make our life easier. I don't believe it's gonna how you said it's gonna close our jobs. Let's put it that way, right? But I think the role of the marketer, growth hacker, or product person might evolve a little bit. So you could even see it for some years already. Like all these customer acquisition tools like Facebook or Facebook ads and Google ads, they use some machine learning for optimization, right? So the role of a marketer, like paid marketer, for example, like it's evolving from going into the platform, looking at the keywords into kind of the strategy, right, high level, how we want to build these things. So it's definitely exciting times. I mean, let's see which direction it's gonna lead us to. But I mean, it's really exciting, and I recommend all of you guys to really start chatting with ChatGPT 4 and try to think how you can be smarter. It's all about the growth mindset, isn't it? Yeah. Question.
Hello, my name is Marius, and I want to ask you, what are the common pitfalls to avoid when scaling marketing efforts for a startup?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I think the biggest pitfall is, again, like starting to do stuff without thinking, right? So many times you want to grow the company, or you're joining the company as a, let's say, marketing manager. You have like 5 people, and they're just doing stuff, right? They're just doing stuff without actually knowing like why they do so, because they've been doing it for many years. So you always, again, that's what I like to do. Take a step back and think, and I obviously mentioned it, like build a strategy, know what you do, what you want to do. So that's definitely important. I think the other pitfall is looking into not looking into the channels or the ways to market or the acquire users, and just doing things that all the other competitors are doing. So anyone is doing Google Ads, I should go do Google Ads as well, which is not the case, right? Obviously, you can spend lots of money and lots of effort on trying to optimize and getting to the level of that's working for you. But perhaps you should spend this time to find another channel, right? So something else, like do something new that your competitors are not doing. Obviously, it doesn't work all the times. Right? Sometimes that for this industry you have to be on Google Ads and you can make that work, right? So be ROI positive. But very often, we have this kind of common roots of thinking, right? Like we've been doing it for so many years. All the people are doing it. Let's do it again. And I think the most successful marketers, the more successful growth marketers are the people that actually try to find new solutions, right? Like think out of the box in a way. And AI can help, but that's the mindset, right? That's the mindset you need to have. Does it make sense for you? Yeah?
Hello, I'm Davidas from Power Laboratory. you mentioned that the experimentation in growth hacking, and you showed examples of companies that offer a product as a service. How do these principles of experimentation apply to companies that offer service as a service? I don't know what the term is.
Yeah. That's also a very good question. So I can give you some examples of Ladder, which is like the service company, like the agency, right? So obviously we were doing growth marketing for our clients, but we had to acquire clients as well, right? So we had the same kind of a methodology, the same kind of the same process of experimentation for acquiring our users, right? And Ladder in general, majority of leads were coming from SEO. Were coming from content, right? So we were experimenting a lot with the content, with the different channels. The same as you would experiment with a SaaS company or with other company, right? So the general process doesn't change, right? The channels might change, right? The metrics might change, but if you have even a service company, doing digital, you need to acquire users, right? You need to keep them happy. Right, and you need to make sure that they are happy from your service to refer, right? The other people. So, do you have a service company? That's what you asked the question, or you work as a service company? What you guys do? You develop business applications. So it's a software house in a way, right? Or yeah. And the software houses use a lot of, but you probably have are you the marketer there? Or you're the developer? Yeah, but you do have the marketer probably, like the acquisition team. Do you have it? Yeah. So there are many software houses that have the growth teams actually, and lots of people that used to work at Ladder, they now progressed and heading growth for software companies. Right, Poland is pretty strong as well in terms of software companies. So the principles are the same, right? The principles are the same. So I wouldn't be much fixated that we are not Facebook, so we shouldn't be doing it, because it's mainly the same. At Ladder, and just to give you an example, we didn't look at any industry. So if there is a client from services or mobile app or SaaS product, we knew that we can scale them because again, the process is the same, right? We just need to get into the customer shoes, understand what's important for them, understand who they want to reach, and experiment. And that's it. And there's no kind of a yeah. All right, thank you. Thank you very much, guys. Again, I hope you found this session interesting, and I hope at least 10% of you will, start to implement this, because as you remember, that was my goal. And yeah, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.